This morning we're going to take a few moments and just talk about Ephesians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, and what it means to live fearlessly. I could talk about the armor of God, but you would be incredibly disinterested if you are not in a fight. If you're not in a battle, who needs armor? If you're not living fearlessly, who needs protection? So the truth is that as Paul begins to outline for the people in Ephesus what it would mean to be covered and protected by the power and the armor of God, it's because he assumes that they, like him, would have a prayer request. Help me live and speak fearlessly. What I've kind of learned over time, I became a Christian in college, and as I learned over time, religion is satisfied with you standing for something. The big emphasis is, what do you stand for? But see, Jesus wasn't satisfied with that. He wanted to know, who will you stand for and who will you stand with? Because the truth is, you can take a stand on a position and it might ruffle a few feathers, but it'll pass. But if you take a firm stand with God and with people, then that becomes a lifelong battle for which you will absolutely need the armor of God. How does Jesus model this for us? I thought I would pick a few stories that we may be familiar with. I thought about Jesus, and he's there and he's doing some teaching, and all these little children come running up out of the stands, so to speak. They come flooding toward him, and even parents want Jesus, and maybe grandparents want Jesus to bless their kids. And Jesus is surrounded by shushers. I didn't say ushers. You know what I'm talking about. Shh, shh, don't shush me. I didn't shush you. You just shush me. He's surrounded by shushers. So the little kids are running at him, and what are they doing? Shh, go on, get out of here. What does Jesus do? He let them little children come up here. Or you think about when Jesus is walking down the road, and there's this guy that's blind. And he's heard about Jesus. And he hears that he's coming through. So he begins to yell out for Jesus, but the shushers, who are always present, show up. Shush, be quiet. What does Jesus say? Let him speak. Oh, the same thing happens with the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery. You see, they're afraid that Jesus' good reputation will get co-signed onto the lives of these people. So those that are excluded in society because of age, because of sin, because of ethnicity, because of gender, all these people that are excluded in society that everyone else wants to shush. Jesus says, come on to me. We don't like to be shushed, do we? Who are the famous shushers in your life? Oh, come on. You know librarians at the top of the list. Right? There's all kinds of people in our lives who want to shush us, and I'm not saying you ought not to be shushed every now and then. I'm thinking about going to class. You read the assignment. You're all jacked up for the conversation. The professor walks in, looks a little disheveled. She says to the class, I don't know how many of you got to read, the material today. Why don't we hold off the discussion till Monday? And you're like, oh, no, let's discuss it today. And everyone else, shush it. There's a guy and his wife having a big argument in their car. They're flying down the freeway, arguing like crazy. Way over the speed limit. That was part of the argument. They blow past the cop. The cop lights them up, pulls them over. Roll down the window, the officer comes up, says, sir, did you know you were going over the speed limit? Looks over at his wife. Police officer looks in and says, oh, no, ma'am, I would love to hear what you've got to say. To which the woman said, I'm not supposed to say nothing when he's been drinking. Every now and then, you might want to shush it. But Jesus says there's times that if you shush it, it's because you're not living fearlessly. It's because you're not standing for and with the people that have no voice. If you grew up going to church, my guess is, ladies, you heard about the lady in Proverbs 31. She's a realtor, a banker. She owns a baking company. I mean, this lady does everything. There's like 9 of them inside one woman, the virtuous woman. But I think it's fascinating that we pass up what is said at the beginning of the chapter. You realize there's actually verses at the beginning of Proverbs 31, and they're not to a woman, they're from a woman. They're from a woman to his son who is a king. And what she says to him is, the reason that kings should never get intoxicated by women or by alcohol or by money is because you just might forget to speak for those who have no voice. You see, what Jesus models for us is while he raises the voice who are being shushed, he shushes the shushers. He's the ones that let them know, who have taken advantage of their position, that you need to learn how to use your power, use your influence to raise the voices of those who have no voice. In Luke chapter 7, we have just such one story. I'll read a part of it for you. Now, one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house, and he reclined at the table when a woman came in who had lived a sinful life in that town. She learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she brought in an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and then she wiped them with her hair. She kissed them, poured perfume on them, and when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he'd know who was touching him. What kind of woman that she is, a sinner." Simon the shusher. Jesus answered him, "Simon, I've got something to tell you." See, Simon wanted Jesus to have a word with the woman. Lady, you don't belong here. People like you shouldn't be seen here. Don't you understand? We don't like folks like you. And you did it to yourself with your own sinful life. That's what he wanted to hear from Jesus. He wanted to hear that worn out sermon that he's been preaching his whole life through his actions. But Jesus said, well, I think she knows what she's going through. It's you that needs to hear a word from God. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One of them owed him a year's wages. The other one, about a day. Neither one of them had money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. And Jesus said, now, which one of you think would love him more? Simon replied, well, probably the guy that had the bigger debt. And Jesus said, you see, you've correctly, but let me show you how it applies to you. Jesus turned to the woman, but talked to Simon. Jesus' gaze on this woman. This woman, Jesus looks at her long enough that she can slowly let her hurting eyes lift and look into Jesus' loving eyes. And Jesus speaks to Simon while he looks lovingly at her. Do you see this woman? Now, Jesus is about to take a stand. He's about to be fearless. He is in Simon's house, on Simon's turf. He's supposed to do what Simon wants him to do, but what Simon wants him to do is wrong. What Simon wants him to do is evil. And Jesus isn't having it. So Jesus, who's already bulked up, armed up, ready to go, takes a stand in the midst of enemy territory and does what Jesus does so well. He says to this woman, here's what you need to know. You've got yourself all wrong. And I'm going to tell you what God thinks of you. And even though the world doesn't think of you that way, I'm going to tell you what God thinks of you, because what God thinks of you is what you ought to think of you. There was a little girl at our church. Her name was Jenny. In the eyes of the world, Jenny did not have much going for her. 5th grade, she was overweight. She was socially awkward. Adopted. Mixed ethnicities. Oh yeah. All of that's awesome in the eyes of God, but not in the eyes of this world, and you know it. Our daughter Amy was in the same grade, 5th grade at the time. So the other girls were trying to get Amy to understand that you can't be friends with Jenny and be friends with us. Jenny's the one we make fun of. Jenny is the one we cast out. We take all of our own insecurities and throw them over on her so we feel better about ourselves at her expense. Amy told him, she said, you got to understand something. You want to be a friend with me, Jenny comes with. If you don't want Jenny, you don't get me. Now, we didn't know this happened until a few weeks later when Jenny's mom came to Susan and I and told us a story. Jenny's mom weeping because Jenny's mom lives with Jenny every day. She knows what Jenny goes through every day. She hurts with Jenny. She wipes her tears at night. She puts her in bed. She hurts for her baby girl. Doesn't anyone care what this girl goes through? Is she just a thing that you won't stand for, a person that you won't stand with? But that's a mother's hurt. Until a little 5th grader suited up, bulked up, and put on the armor of God, and in enemy territory took a stand for Jenny and for her friends, a stand with Jenny and with her friends. She told us that story. We went home. We asked Amy about it. And here's what she said. She said, I think we made hell rumble. In the 5th grade, she had it figured out that how you treat that person down the hall has spiritual implications, cosmic implications. It has implications outside of your hall, outside of your dorm room, outside of your apartment. It has implications outside of the class, outside of the team, outside of anything you're involved in. It has implications outside of your ethnicity, your political party, your religion, the church you go to. It is time for Christians to suit up, bulk up, and understand that in enemy territory, Satan is always trying to divide, and we are the force from above that comes into the world and says, not on our watch. We don't live like this. We've got the full armor of God. And we stand for each other. And we stand with each other. Now, the truth is, Simon the Pharisee didn't like this. But that woman went away brand new. So what about you and me? Earlier this summer, my wife and I were at a luncheon in downtown Atlanta, and we got to see Dikembe Mutombo. You have a picture of Dikembe and me? Do you have that? There. I'm on the right. I have the blue tie. That's me. Yeah. Those of you that follow basketball a little bit, Dikembe was famous. He was a superpower in the middle, and whenever he would block a shot, what would he do? He'd go like this. He was a shusher. He knew how to stop the incoming player that was going to drive past him. But you know what Dikembe's really all about? Dikembe's really all about Jesus Christ. He's all about his life in Christ. And he couldn't wait to retire from the NBA to get back to what it was really all about. And so I've seen Dikembe many times, and I went over to him, and I wanted to ask him how his ministry was doing. And so we got into a conversation that still looks about like the first picture, doesn't it? Then I asked Dikembe, I said, man, how are you doing, and how's it going? And he looked at me, and he said, Pastor, my father was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. My uncle is a deacon. Everyone wants to know, why do I give all of my time and all of my money away to serve other people? He said, I'll tell you why. Because someday I am going to stand before God. And He is going to look at me and say, Dikembe, I gave you a voice. How did you use it? I gave you a body and talent and athletic ability. How did you use it? And I must answer him. And he said, Pastor, he will ask you the same question. He hugged me. But you can tell I'm still thinking about Dikembe's question. And I'm suggesting you need to be thinking about it too. Because someday you will get the opportunity to stand before God. And He's going to say to you, I gave you a voice, and I gave you these gifts, and I gave you these talents. What did you do with it? And you'll begin to think back over your life with the Lord. And you begin to share tears and joy and happiness for all the ways that you partnered with God to do great things. I've had the joy the last few days of seeing, talking to, hugging the guy that baptized me 37 years ago when I was a junior in college. He met me when I transferred. He was a year older than me, but he seemed like he was 100 years beyond me in maturity. I'll make it simple. The truth was, he had what I wanted. He was my friend. I wasn't a great friend. I was immature and impulsive. I was on probation from the court, on probation for academics. I'm the first boy to go to college out of my family. I had no what I was doing, no idea. But he walked with me, spent time with me all that year, all the next. And on a Tuesday afternoon, November 17th, 1981, we walked over together to a pool of water. He baptized me into a new life. The life I get to live. The life I get to share with you this morning. But the reason I'm here is because someone did for me what Jesus did for that woman. Here's my guess. Whether your faith feels strong or not, some of you know the Lord. And it might not look like much to you, but to a guy like me, it looks like everything. You might feel like you don't pray enough, read the Bible enough. You feel what I'm saying? But to someone like me, man, you're 2 laps ahead of me already. So just stay with me. Stand for me. Stand by me. Don't let me go. So that I could meet the Jesus that you already know. And I could live the life together with you that Jesus has for us. So what I'd ask you to do is live fearlessly.